through our efforts in the West, we've managed to drive a country with the most resources in the world, that's Russia, into an alliance with the country that's the biggest manufacturer in the world, which is China, against us. You know, before I was thrown out of the Conservative Party in 2023, you know, they told me, when I raised my concerns privately with the party, they told me that, you know, Andrew, there's currently no political appetite for your views on the vaccines. There may well be in 20 years' time, and you're probably going to be proven right then. But in the meantime, you need to bear in mind you're taking on the most powerful vested interest in the world, with all the personal risk for you that will entail. And you actually get on in politics, not by protecting your electorate. You do it by promoting the party line. And when that's in conflict with your electorate, that is where you win your brownie points, and you're getting on the greasy pole, that you're showing that your loyalty is to the party, not to your people.
I'm Jasmine Birtles, and today I'm joined by the former MP for North West Leicestershire, Andrew Bridgen. Andrew was MP for 14 years for that region, but in the latest election he's been pushed out, and he has all sorts of other projects that are really interesting that he's looking at. Andrew, thank you so much for joining me.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
So let's just start off first, Andrew, with what you're doing now, because you're probably not too sad to say goodbye to Parliament at the moment, and I can imagine you have all sorts of interesting projects coming up. Are there any that you can tell us about?
Yeah, I don't miss going down to London. I'm in Leicestershire, and it's my home, and it's nice to be out of the pantomime, to be honest. In a way, it's actually quite a relief. However, I just worry there's no one to speak up for the people, because what you've got is the uni-party have won again. We've got a Labour Party with lots of new MPs, and from my own experience, I mean, momentous decisions that will be rammed through that Parliament by Keir Starmer around the conflict, war in Ukraine, Gaza, net zero, the WHO treaty and the amendments to international health regulations. Lots and lots of things, digital ID cards, potentially central bank digital currency, things that are really going to change the relationship between citizen and state. And you've got a lot of very new MPs who, quite honestly, will not know the power they've got, the power and the responsibilities they've got. In fact, I would say for the first 6 months, they won't even know where to go and hang their coats. and that is what I've noticed, thinking back to 2010, where we also had a massive intake of new MPs following the expenses scandal, that a lot of the real bad stuff was rammed through before people had got to their feet.
It does seem to be happening very quickly. I mean, we had Ed Miliband suddenly closing down oil, effectively, North Sea oil, not exactly, but, you know, cutting that off and going big on wind farms. And we've also had Keir Starmer actually offering weapons to Ukraine to use in Russia. I mean, that was, he pulled back on it, but still, it's an extraordinary thing. Just within a week, it seems.
Yes, and that is planned. That the difficult stuff, the stuff that might be the most contentious and very contentious legislation, will be rammed through in the first few weeks. Those newly elected MPs are, until they find their feet and their confidence, they're nothing more than lobby fodder. And from my own experience, the Labour Party is far more tribal loyalty than the Conservative Parliamentary Party, where there are more free thinkers and free speakers. So, Starmer's an authoritarian leader. I think we should look at what his co-director of the DPP said about him. Obviously, Starmer didn't arrive in Parliament until 2015. I'd already been there 5 years. So Starmer had implemented David Cameron's austerity cuts in his department, and his co-director said that he did it with relish and vigour.
Great.
So he's a man who carries out his orders. Well, I'm sure when the World Economic Forum from his meeting in Davos tell him what he's got to do, I mean, he's going to do it. And what we can probably surmises, it's not going to be in the interests of the public. And who's going to stand up in Parliament and give the contrary view? We've had no opposition as such in Parliament for a very long time. There was consensus, an uncomfortable consensus around the pandemic, the vaccines, the lockdowns, the WHO, net zero. Who's actually speaking for the people? And this is where our democracy is all failing. And they've delivered Starmer 60% of all the seats in Parliament, a massive majority, the biggest one I've probably ever known in my life, with barely the support of 1 in 5 of the public actually voting for him. And I think that will be one of the shortest political honeymoons in history. And I would go so far as to say that I think there'll be unrest within 12 months when people realise that they'd lost faith in the Conservative Party. It wasn't, again, governments, oppositions don't win elections. I think governments lose them. And having done nothing Conservative for 5 years, the Conservatives deserved everything they got. And when the public feel betrayed by a Labour Party that pursue exactly the same agenda of Agenda 2030, with even more vigour and a bigger majority, I think that's when we're going to get to a position where people actually lose faith in the current system.
Yeah, because the only, if you like, opposition we have at the moment is the Liberal Democrats with an extraordinary number of seats for them. But I don't see very much difference between what they're thinking and what Labour's thinking. And then it's a little handful of Reform and a few Conservatives still left, and they're not going to have much power, I'm assuming.
No, and even when you speak, and the power of the whips, I remember speaking out against the government on a number of issues, and I wish looking back, I wish I'd spoken out more. I don't regret any of it, but I mean, I spoke to one of the whips and said, did you not listen to my arguments? Whether it was about HS2 at the time, or the vaccines, or lockdowns, or whatever. And one of the senior whips said to me, Andrew, I always listen to your speeches. I said, did it change your mind? He said, it might have changed my mind. He said, but it never changes my vote.
Right. That gives one huge amounts of confidence, of course.
That's the way Parliament works. And of course, you actually get on in politics not by protecting your electorate. You do it by promoting the party line. And when that's in conflict with your electorate, that is where you win your brownie points, and you're getting on the greasy pole, that you're showing that your loyalty is to the party, not to your people. And that's what we've got to get away from. And if we had MPs that actually represented their area and only voted for legislation that was in the best interests of the public, I mean, isn't that what we should have had? Well, we certainly haven't got that now. The party system is completely corrupted from the top down.
Well, we certainly had that in my area. We had a Conservative MP, which I wrote to, and some of my friends wrote to, saying, please stop giving the vaccine to children. And we got the standard, let me be clear, this is safe and effective. She's gone now. We've got a Labour one. So I'm going to send him a letter. But I suspect...
I suspect you'll get a very similar answer from the uni.
Yeah.
And the number of special advisors and even civil servants, Valence becoming the science minister from the Lords. Yeah. And I've heard that Ollie Robbins is now involved in the new Labour government. So that was the civil servant who went and negotiated, if negotiation is a very loose term, Theresa May's appalling Brexit deal, which I voted down 3 times and was one of the Spartans that held off against it. I mean, that shows you that the plan's the same. They can work for any government, because ultimately the end game is the same in the uni-party. It's just a different colour badge and a slight spin on it.
And I assume for the vaccine, there's nobody now left in Parliament who will stand up and stand up for the vaccine injured.
Well, Chris Chope is back in, but I mean, he disappointed me on my 3-hour debate. I think it was the 18th of April. The full debate in the main chamber that I managed to get eventually, when he said that he had no doubt that the benefits outweighed the disadvantages for the vast majority of people. I mean, there aren't any advantages, and data that's going to come out this week. So by the time this program goes out, we'll be able to demonstrate that. Or we should come out a few weeks ago before the general election. But how the media are going to spin this is going to be fascinating, because they are so committed to the narrative, as the political class are as a whole. The data is absolutely unequivocal. It's control level data from the Czech Republic. It's all of their vaccine records, anonymized. So they've taken the names off the individuals, about 10 million records for the whole country. They've taken their day of birth of the month and the month of birth, but left the year in, so that's good enough for analysis. And we've got their date of vaccination, what vaccine they got, and if applicable, date of death. And what I can give you from the headline figures is that it's not easy to compare the unvaccinated with the vaccinated, because people, obviously the unvaccinated is a smaller group, and people didn't get vaccinated for a number of reasons, some because they're very healthy and some because they were very ill. But what you can say is that if all the vaccines were safe and effective, then there wouldn't be any outcome difference depending on which vaccine you had. And in the Czech Republic, there was no preference of vaccine, so you basically turned up and you got what they got. So it was random. What we can tell you is, from the control level data, the Czech government's own data, by analysing it, that Moderna was 50% more lethal than Pfizer.
Wow.
And that Pfizer was twice as lethal as Novavax.
Yeah, and this is, so this has come out, and the question is, will anybody take any notice? Anybody in Parliament take any notice? Anybody at the top of the NHS, will they take notice? And as you say, what about the media? How will they spin it, or will they just ignore it? I suspect the latter.
I suspect the latter, but I'm approaching Neil Oliver and see if we can get on there and see if we can do something. He's now lost his producer. Beth is no longer with him, so it's now being done centrally, and we'll see if they've got an appetite for the truth. The fact is that this data is gold standard. It's from a government. That's their data. It's exactly the same data that every other government's got. It's the same data that our government's got, that they refused to release on multiple occasions when I challenged them in the chamber to prove that the vaccines are safe and effective, release the control level data that they hold, which they refused to. And I think when you see the Czech data, that explains why the British government and other governments around the world don't want to release the control level data. What we got with Barry Young, the whistleblower from New Zealand, he was handling payments to people who were vaccinating, but he'd only got about a third of the vaccine records for New Zealand, which is a population of about 5 million people. And of course, he's facing criminal prosecution next year and potentially 7 years in prison, as a lesson to all other whistleblowers not to speak out. Well, this data is the whole of the Czech Republic's data, released under FOI by the Czech government, and it's about 10 million
impressive
records, and it's the whole country's vaccine records. So the data's gold standard, and the analysis is just maths, and either the maths is right or the maths wrong. Well, I mean, anyone who chooses to look at the data and has it analysed, they can only come to one conclusion. That's what I've been calling for 2 years, that the experimental messenger RNA vaccines should be suspended immediately, and a full independent inquiry, not only just in the UK, but around the world. And this is the explanation for the excess deaths, or at least in part, a major part of the excess deaths we've seen, where the vaccines have been rolled out.
Well, that's the thing, isn't there? That we now are getting waves of vaccine skepticism across the board, and not surprisingly, given how we've been treated. But now that you're not an MP, you don't have a voice in Parliament, but you must have voice, as you say, you're speaking in some places. Are there other ways that you're getting the message across, any other channels?
Well, I'm hoping to get on to GB News this weekend, and I think that's the only bit of mainstream media that we're in the chance of actually getting a reasonable interview with. I mean, I'll offer myself to the BBC, ITV, Sky, and Channel 4, but whenever I've offered, following any of my speeches for the last 2 years, they've never taken me up. And that's no surprise, Jasmine, because in 2014 and 2015 and 2016, when I'd actually got all the evidence that the convictions of the sub-postmasters on Horizon Evidence was unsafe, and I'd got the statement from the Fujitsu whistleblower that they had been altering remotely the accounts of sub-postmasters without their knowledge, something that had always been denied in court, I went to all the media with everything and all the newspapers, and no one would run the story then either.
It's so you lost faith in the media back then, and you really lost faith now.
And it's absolutely. And you know, when I look back, you know, I last summer I did some research into the thalidomide scandal and made a little 12-minute YouTube video about thalidomide, the real story. And the fact is that, you know, thalidomide was withdrawn in 1961. It was 1972 before the word thalidomide was allowed to be mentioned in a debate in the House of Commons. They covered it up for 11 years.
Disgusting.
And as I mentioned earlier this year in Parliament, that I wasn't going to let it happen again, because it's happened too many times. And you know, before I was thrown out of the Conservative Party in 2023, you know, they told me, when I raised my concerns privately with the party, they told me that, you know, Andrew, there's currently no political appetite for your views on the vaccines. There may well be in 20 years' time, and you're probably going to be proven right then. But in the meantime, you need to bear in mind you're taking on the most powerful vested interest in the world, with all the personal risk for you that will entail. And I always thought that as a member of Parliament, my duty was to protect the best interests of my electorate and the country wider, and that was to speak without fear or favour in the chamber of the House of Commons. And, you know, I can promise you from my experience, there's an awful lot of favour in the House of Commons, and there's an awful lot of fear.
Yeah.
That's how they like it.
Yeah, I can well imagine. And I seem to remember that you spoke to the Labour Party as well to see if they would take on pharma, and they said no.
They said no. That was Labour frontbenchers telling me there's no way they were going to take on big pharma. But they don't mind, you know, standing up and saying we represent the people. Well, they don't represent the people, because on the big issues they were never. No, the politicians just weren't willing to stand up. And you know, lots of them were vaccine harmed themselves. I was harmed. I had, you know, I've had senior, when I first spoke out, mainly I voted against and spoke against Plan B back in 2021, in December 2021, voted against all that, and the masking and the lockdowns and everything else, because Omicron was not a threat. But I spoke out on the 13th of December 2022 when the MHRA, the Medicines and Healthcare Product Regulatory Agency, were asking the government to authorise the jabs down to babies of 6 months. And of course, I went round my colleagues and said, you know, this is the science. Will you stand up with me? I knew I'd get attacked, and I wanted people to stand with me. And then, you know, they can't attack you because there'd be 5 of us, or 3 of us, or 4 of us. And they, you know, I went to people I thought would have the moral courage and the understanding and the willingness to do it, and they basically all agreed with me that it shouldn't happen, but nobody wanted to speak out. They said they weren't going to speak out. Plenty of MPs said they'd had 2, and there was definitely something wrong with these things. They wouldn't have any more. One senior colleague told me he'd had 2 minor heart attacks after the second Pfizer, and was told by the doctors if he wasn't as fit as he was, he'd probably be dead, and he wouldn't speak out. And one of the colleagues' wife came to me and said that her husband had now got heart problems following the second jab. But none of them spoke out. Some of them said they were going to speak out, some didn't. A bit later on, another colleague came to me and said that her sister had just taken the Moderna booster and was paralysed from the neck down. And I said I was really sorry, and but obviously now you know you've got a duty to speak out, and I'll help you. And she said that her sister was a nurse and didn't want to speak out because of the NHS and all the backlash. And I said, well, you don't have to tell anybody how you know. The fact is, you know. So you must speak out. And she said, well, the doctors are fairly confident she'll probably be able to walk again in due course. And she said, I'm not speaking out. And she never did. She just walked off and left me.
It's just tragic. And then, as you say, this is not democracy. This is not what people voted MPs in for. And the elections that we've just had, as you mentioned, we have a landslide majority for Labour, and it was only 20% of the total, electorate that actually voted them in. So where now for democracy, do you think?
Well, the current system's not working. The party system is corrupted by vested interests, buying influence. They've bought both the Labour Party, the Conservative Party, the Liberal Democrats and the SNP on all the big issues. So the uni-party speaks with one voice on all the big issues, and the rest of it's just a pantomime of trying to create the illusion of on peripheral issues, like whether there's a penny on or off tax or whatever. That is the pantomime, and I'm afraid, I believe that the pantomime for this election was so tired, so easily seen through by the public, of Starmer and Sunak, that it's a bit like EastEnders when the producer said, well, no one's watching it anymore, so we need to bring in a new character with a new storyline and refresh it, get some interest. And Nigel Farage and Richard Tice, they are the new characters to bring into the pantomime to get a bit of interest. But I mean, what they actually did, it was delivered Starmer his massive majority.
So do you think that Farage and Tice will do good, or they'll just carry on supporting what's the status quo?
They're both on television a lot. I'm not. That tells you all you need to know, doesn't it? I also went to see Nigel Farage in January 23. I petitioned him to help me stop and protect the children. And he basically told me that he didn't want to talk about vaccine harms and deaths. And if I knew what was good for me, I wouldn't either.
That's not helpful, because I know.
And of course, Richard Tice told me at the time on air that I was completely wrong about the vaccines. Well, I'm going to send Richard Tice a copy of the analysis of the Czech data.
Good idea.
Yeah. And they're the same vaccines that were given out to our people.
Yeah, right. I think all the MPs need to see that, and we need to see their reaction, if any, in public. I suspect that we won't see any reaction at all, but you never know. Maybe one or two. There may be some that are brave enough to stand. I don't know. We haven't seen it so far. Sadly.
Well, I think when my degree a long time ago from Nottingham University was in biological sciences, specialising with biochemistry and genetics and virology, I think I was, what excuse had I got not to speak out?
Absolutely. So just thinking about democracy, you're involved in the direct democracy movement, are you? I believe.
I've come round to thinking that I think we are going to, this as dark as it seems now, it's going to get a lot darker. So many political threats on the horizon. A Labour Party that's got a majority can ram anything through the Commons. So, WHO didn't give up. They've got a pandemic treaty. I haven't seen the detail of it, but it'll be no good for us. The amendments to international health regulations as well, taking sovereignty away from us. We've got Labour going to sign up to a defence pact with the European Union. Why would need that when we're already in NATO? Well, there's only one deal on offer, and that is the European Defence and Security Pact. That will give the European Union Ursula von der Leyen, unelected and out of our control, complete control of our army, navy, air force, MI5, MI6, GCHQ, our nuclear deterrent, and the kicker, our local police force. That is the deal. That's being forced on every member of the European Union. And that is the security and defence deal that Starmer. And some will say we haven't gone back into the European Union, but how we can ever be a sovereign nation when we're giving those powers away to the European Union is that is the ultimate insult for Brexit. That we've got all that to look forward to. He's already announced that he's taking the oil and gas licenses for new fields in the North Sea, and they're going to be pushing the net zero agenda with all their might. That's another fraud that's being perpetrated on the people around the world. This is going to make people poorer, colder, and less free, and fulfills many of the agendas of Agenda 2030. So, I mean, this has got to be resisted. I think it's going to be the shortest political honeymoon in history, and maybe it will take the betrayal of the people, as the Conservatives betrayed the people by the Labour Party, for people to see that the system's broken and not fit for purpose. Direct democracy, it's not a perfect system, but it's a better system, I think, in that democracy is from the Greek. Demos is the people and kratos is power. Well, I'd ask the people who are listening to this podcast, I mean, how powerful do you feel? I mean, do you feel powerful? We've just had an election, you know. Most people, 40% of the people couldn't be bothered to vote. That's how empowered they felt to, or enthused by the choices they were given. So the current system is not working. I think these are probably some of the last elections of this type we're ever going to see, for various reasons. I think we are, despite the odds against us, we are going to stop the globalists from enacting 2030 on Agenda 2030 on us. I think that the backlash is going to be that, and it's not just in our country; it's going to be around the world. And whatever we do then, we can't allow a system where our democracy is taken over and perverted in the way it has been. So we need a new system. And if it were up to me, I would go for direct democracy. I would get rid of the House of Lords tomorrow. They serve no useful function. They have not protected the public interest on any of the issues that will be of concern. It's also somewhere where you reward party lackeys for betraying the trust of their electorate. And when they lose their seats, they just stick them in the House of Lords and they've got a signature for life. So that's no good. I think we need to move to a system where we have a smaller chamber, no outside interests. Probably 325 MPs is enough, so double the number of the size of the constituencies. It's less people to monitor, quite honestly. The party system has got to go, and the whipping's got to go, and legislation needs to be produced in the Commons chamber, and then we need to move to the Swiss model, where every 3 months we have a referendum on the public have to debate and consider the merits of all the legislation, and they vote on, I don't know, 8 or 10 different things every 3 months, and the public become the government again.
Yeah, well, it sounds
when they have the final say.
Yeah, it sounds more like democracy.
Well, that's a system that's been in Switzerland for I think 150 years, and we need devolved power down to the regions and the counties, the lowest level possible, because this centralisation of power allows for a lot of abuse. And if it's not centralised, they can't control it. It is about control. What we've seen is, because the centralisation of power, we've seen governments around the world apparently losing their collective minds, but acting in lockstep, where apart from Sweden that didn't invoke the lockdowns, every government around the world ripped up their well-established pandemic response documents and guidance and just went with something else, which has proved extremely damaging.
So this, I mean, I'm a fan of direct democracy. I know that there'll be a lot of people who will sigh deeply and go, "Oh, I don't want to have to debate these things." But
what's the alternative? What's the alternative?
Exactly.
You can't trust the politicians not to be corrupted and not be working in your interest. So, you know, and people say to me, you know, I'm not interested in politics. Well, I'm very sorry. There's a lot of politicians very interested in you,
Yeah.
and that's not going to change. That's not good news for you. So either get interested, or when we have, and it hasn't even become apparent what's been perpetrated against the people yet, and they will be horrified, and a lot of them are not ready for anywhere near all of it yet, but it will all come out eventually, I think. And I don't want to be in a situation where this can ever be carried out again. So we must change the system to protect the people, and that means they have to take much bigger part, and there'll have to be public debates about legislation. And direct democracy is the best way.
So in the meantime, I mean, right now, because News Uncut readers, viewers are very interested in politics, they're very concerned. What can each individual do? Is it a question of literally getting out on the streets and protesting?
Well, the first thing is we've got a lot of new MPs, and we, you know, they do need to lobby them. But I mean, I'll have a bet they'll just get the template letters from their research units, signed off by the MPs, and that's what they're going to get. But I mean, I think it does have to go on the record. But then it is going to be, and I hate to say it, I mean, there's going to be direct action, I think, which is, you know, in that bubble of Westminster with a massive Labour majority and, you know, a landslide of 20%, 1 in 5. I mean, I mean, democracy is not really working, is it?
No, exactly. So it's a question of us contacting our MPs, even though we're going to get a dusty answer, we know. I assume contacting the media, commenting here and there, setting up your own social media to promulgate what you're thinking. I mean, it seems to me that there are actually a lot of people, a lot of individuals across the country who are concerned about what's happening and what's going to happen, as you have suggested, and feeling helpless. But they're not helpless, are they?
Well, no, but I also don't subscribe to this, that there's some guy on a white horse coming over the hill to save us all. I think we've got to save ourselves, and we take responsibility for ourselves. On the front about the media, I have been approached by some individuals who've spoken with Steve Bannon, the war room in the US, and we might look at the feasibility of setting up a very similar, with Steve's support, a war room for the UK, and I can think of lots of interesting people we could interview.
Yes.
And I think it's going to be a huge demand. And at the end of the day, anything that takes away the audience, deservedly, the audience, ever reducing audience of the mainstream media, because so many people have woken up to the fact that they just don't tell you the truth.
No.
And the biggest power of the mainstream media has always been the power of omission. They decide what is and isn't the news. And for 5 years, until ITV made a drama documentary about the Post Office Horizon scandal, they decided that it wasn't news. And, well, you know, but you can go back in Hansard to 2015, and everything that was in that mini documentary, I'd already said in the House of Commons, but nobody listened. No one cared.
No.
Until the public cared, and it will be like that about the vaccine harms as well, which we're seeing that play out. It will be like that about net zero. It will be that about the WHO. What I found the last few years is that in Parliament is that there's just a number of issues that no one wants to talk about in Parliament. And the media don't want to talk. Mysteriously, exactly the same stories that the media doesn't want to talk about.
Funny that.
And I used to annoy my colleagues across the House, because when I raised the issues in a debate or questions, the rules are that those people might write to me, but they have to write to their own MP, which then forced MPs to talk about issues they didn't want to talk about, knowingly put themselves on the wrong side of history, because they'd rather not talk about it than give the party line, which they know is wrong and will be proved wrong. It's best not to talk about it. And they used to come and complain to me years ago, saying, "Why do you keep having these debates?" They get bombarded with emails from their constituents. So although they didn't want to talk about it, a large number of their constituents were very concerned about it, quite rightly. And they seem to think that we should run Parliament by just not talking about issues so that public don't have awareness. Well, I mean, we need an engaged public. The public are very engaged in what's going on at the moment, and it's going to become more engaged. We're pretty much committed now.
It does occur to me that, as you say, in the public are engaged, and although
even the ones who don't realise it, they are engaged.
Yes, absolutely. But there are grassroots organisations that more and more people are joining, and there is the strength in numbers. I'm just thinking of the Together movement. I'm thinking of Stand in the Park, and there are various smaller groups that have got together. People are getting together, and I do think there's a lot of hope from the grassroots, and that anybody who feels like they're the only one, not all of their friends and family seem to think differently, there are places they can go. There are groups they can join and swell the numbers, and those ultimately will have power, won't they?
They will. And well, I thought that when more than half of the population of the UK realised there was something not right about these vaccines, that something would change. I would say it's 75-80% of people now realise. I mean, you've got, the last booster round, only 29% of NHS staff are willing to take it.
Yeah.
The cameraman I use is very, very gifted, and he was 22 years with ITV, fully awake, and just couldn't. They got rucks of people who were vaccine harmed. He couldn't go and interview. He has a lady friend who's a nurse in Birmingham in A&E, and he texted her the other night and said, any chance we can go out for a meal? And she said, she showed me the text. She said, flat out busy, the hospital, lots of strokes, heart attacks, and cancer coming into A&E. And he texted back and said, vaccine harms, and she came back, yes, of course.
And yet it's not being talked about at all in Parliament or in the media.
No, because whistleblowers, whether you're a politician, you get accused of anti-Semitism, racism, anti-scientific, and I'm one of the very few people in Parliament with a science degree. I mean, half of what they did to me for speaking out was to punish me, but half of it was to scare the others, and it scared them. Yeah. And what happens, every doctor I know I know some brilliantly dedicated, just the sort of doctors, GPs and surgeons, cancer experts, who've spoken out about their concerns about the safety and efficacy of these experimental gene therapies, and every one of them has lost their license.
Yeah.
And people have got mortgages to pay, the cost of living crisis, and they make an example of every whistleblower. We are also looking at a concept on that, which I think could be a solution. What if there were an insurance policy put up by a benevolent organisation that would insure all legal costs and 5 years' pay for anybody who was willing to whistleblow within the professions about malpractice?
That would be good. Would there be enough money? Because that sort of thing.
I think we could raise enough money. And who wouldn't be in favour of that? I mean, if everybody on paper says that whistleblowers should be protected, well, in practice they never are. They never are. Whether that's in Parliament or it's the excellent Professor Norman Fenton, Mary's University.
Yeah.
He was forced to retire, and he was only analysing the numbers. He's a mathematician, a statistician. All he was doing was saying there's something significant going on here. Look at these numbers. This is the data. I'm just analysing it. He was chair of the touring group. He was forced out of that, and what I will say is that all of us who've spoken out and taken the brickbats and the attacks and the smears, none of us have backed down.
No.
And there's nothing in it for us. I mean, it's a hiding for nothing at the moment. But we're standing on the truth, and the truth will come out. It is only a matter of time. Even those appalling people in the Conservative Party have told me it's 20 years. That's what they wanted, 20 years. They got 11 years. They got 11 years with thalidomide. They got 10 years with the post office.
Yeah.
10 years with the post office. Well, yeah, they think they're going to get 20 years. Well, we haven't got 20 years because they're manufacturing the bird flu vaccine now, Jasmine, and I've seen the trial data. It's 4 times at least more lethal than the COVID-19 vaccines.
Oh, good grief. Right.
Guess who they're going to mandate first as well?
Yes, the elderly and the sick.
And the farmers.
Right, of course, because the farmers haven't had enough horribleness thrown at them so far.
We're still producing some food in this country, and that's got to stop.
Yes, yes.
They've taken 20% of their land off them. I mean, can you think of if you had a factory or a retail outlet where just government overnight said 20% of your factory, we want you to clear all your machinery, you can't use that, but how many of those businesses would be viable?
Yeah.
None of them. No, very, 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 very few would be viable.
Yeah.
And that's what they're doing to our farmers. We already, and this is the madness. I mean, this shows you what's the madness of the policies. 1 minute, well, we're constantly being threatened with, we're going to be at war with Russia within 5 years. We're already at war with Russia. We're told that conscription may be necessary, national service for our 18-year-olds. France and Germany have already passed all the legislation for conscription. They can enact it overnight now. So, these are real threats. They do all this. And at the same time, last week, they shut the last steelworks in the country that can produce weapons-grade steel. And they're making our farmers grow less food, 20% less food through set-aside and flowers. Well, I mean, food, has been used against us in 2 world wars. None of the policies make sense.
No.
I mean, it's a road to absolute disaster. And we believe in nuclear deterrence, which is why we have our expensive Trident missiles. On paper, we have 215 warheads. We've got considerably less than that. That's what we could have. We've probably got no more than 150. And we have that because when you've got nuclear weapons, people don't mess about with you because you've got nuclear weapons. And we're continually prodding the Russian bear in the eye, and they've got probably around about 5,800 warheads.
Yeah.
And I don't ask for any reasonable person to consider that since 1991, at the end of the Soviet Union, we have moved, NATO and Europe, the European Union have moved 1,000 miles nearer to Moscow. Russia has not moved nearer to us. We did give undertakings in 91 that if they released East Germany to recombine with West Germany, we were not going to move any further east. They've moved considerably further than that. President Putin has told us repeatedly for the last 10 years, he's not going to have missiles in Ukraine on his border, NATO missiles, which could potentially hit Moscow in 30 minutes. And if we want, how fair is that? How reasonable is that? Well, we can also recall that in 1962, when the then Soviet Union sought to place nuclear missiles in Cuba, 90 miles off the Floridan coast, we had a nuclear standoff. I mean, it's not unreasonable.
And what I'm wondering about, though, when it comes to conscription and even the threat of war, surely we, the people, can rise up and just refuse. This is something that I think we're beginning to learn, that we really can say no.
Well, I think that is the power that the people have. I would like us to avert getting to that situation. But let's be clear, currently there are British personnel supervising and aiming British Storm Shadow missiles being fired out of Ukraine into Russia, and so are all the other NATO members. Biden's just authorized officially for American contractors, that's mercenaries, to be allowed to fight in Ukraine. They've been there for a long time. They've been there for a long time, and so there are British, French, and lots of others. And they haven't squared with the public what's actually going on. We are being dragged inevitably into a World War III situation. And what a triumph of democracy, of diplomacy it is that through our efforts in the West, we've managed to drive a country with the most resources in the world, that's Russia, into an alliance with the country that's the biggest manufacturer in the world, which is China, against us.
Genius.
Against us. And how is that in the interests of good diplomacy and in the interests of the people of Northwest Leicestershire or the rest of the UK or the Western world? This is madness. It
is madness. But I just keep going back to the sense that this can be stopped if we as individuals stop feeling helpless and stop putting up our hands going, oh, they're all
we just had a general election campaign of 6 weeks, and just like no one wanted to talk about any of these issues in Parliament, nobody really wanted to talk about any of them in the election campaign. They didn't want to talk. No one mentioned the WHO, did they?
No.
No one mentioned. They barely mentioned net zero. That's just a given. Nobody really wanted to talk about any change of policy on Ukraine or Gaza, where unspeakable actions are being taken against mostly civilians. And no one certainly wanted to talk about vaccine harms and excess deaths.
And then finally, Andrew, let's finish with something that, because we're looking for solutions here. What would you say to anybody watching this, listening to this? What would you say is the important thing that they must do this year, or some of the important things that they must do in order to make a difference, in order to be part of the solution to this?
And what I would say is that on lots of these issues, we've got to talk about them, and people have got to talk about them. You've got to contact your MPs and let them know, your elected representatives, let them know that you're concerned. Because of some of the smears around all of these issues, people are worried that they might be the only person who's thinking this, and they actually end up in silos. That is not the case. Awareness of all of these issues is rising exponentially. You need to have the confidence to be able to have a chat with your next door neighbours and people down the road and your relatives and your friends. And the only way we're going to turn this around is not going to be the House of Commons. That's going to be the last place that's going to admit to what's been going on and what's been perpetrated against the people. It's going to have to come from the grassroots. And no one's going to come and save us. We've got to save ourselves.
Yeah.
And it's going to become, we haven't got years, we've only got months now, because the building blocks are set in place, whether that's the war in Ukraine, which could blow up, because Biden and his Democrats, or whoever's controlling President Biden, they know that a major war would give them an excuse to cancel the elections in November.
Yeah, exactly, which is another coincidence, of course.
Absolutely. And thank goodness that Trump survived the assassination attempt.
Absolutely.
Well, yeah. I think God's on our side, and having looked at the last page, it's always the same. God wins. We're going to be all right.
We're going to be all right. Thank you very much, Andrew. You've given us a lot of time. Really good of you to do that. And I think we should have another chat in another few months just to see what's happened and what's going to happen next.
There'll be a lot happening.
Well, thank you very much, Andrew. It was Andrew Bridgen, former MEP for North West Leicestershire, and doing a lot of interesting things right now.